Bridges, Aldcombe, Haywards Heath, Wibblesfield, Burgess Hill, Essex, Preston Park, and Brighton.
All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Aisha Abdul Rahman. I titled this presentation Archives in VR, How I Use VR as an Archivist, Preserving Black History at the Sojourner Truth African Heritage Museum. This project is sponsored by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, Space in the Gap, and the Sojourner Truth African Heritage Museum. So for today's presentation, I'm going to begin with actually showing a video that I created that shows you behind the scenes of what my day is like as an archivist at the Sojourner Truth Museum. So I kind of take you through the process of what that looks like. And then I will also ask questions. And then if we have a little bit of time out, I can actually take you guys through the VR project that I've been working on with Sojourner Truth, so that you can see the work in progress that's going on, which ties into today's presentation. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to work as an archivist at a heritage museum? Well, today you're in luck. I'm going to take you along with me as I share what it looks like, not only as an archivist at a heritage museum, but a virtual reality archivist. My name is Aisha Abdul Rahman, and I am an archivist. I specialize in digital archives, specifically browser-based virtual reality and augmented reality. So come along with me today as I share a little bit about the process and my journey to becoming a virtual reality archivist. As an archivist that specializes in virtual reality, 9 times out of 10, I am not starting from scratch. I spend a bit of time doing a bit of exploration and research of the exhibit that currently exists and looking into ways that I can incorporate virtual and augmented reality into that exhibit. So today I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like. We have an exhibit at the Sojourner Truth African Heritage Museum where it focuses on African American cowboys. For the past several weeks, I've been working on a browser-based virtual reality exhibit that will extend the experience of a physical exhibit. Today, I'm going to be adding QR codes to link the two. So if you are currently physically looking at the exhibit, you're able to scan with your phone and bring you into the browser-based virtual reality. Intention is not only to increase access, but also engagement and the details of information that people can learn while they are engaging with the exhibit itself. VR headsets like these can be very expensive. Museums may not be able to afford a virtual reality headset for each of their exhibits. In addition to that, people may not be able to afford virtual reality headsets at home. Browser-based virtual reality allows people to experience VR in a way very similar to a gaming console. Browser-based VR allows you to extend your experience with the exhibits in any device that has a browser. That can be your cell phone, it can be a tablet, it can be a desktop or a laptop, in addition to a VR headset. Currently, I am developing a QR code and the design of the landing page for the QR code that's going to interact with my physical exhibit and my browser-based VR exhibit about James Beckworth. Some of the QR codes that I create don't only interact with browser-based VR, but they also interact with ebooks, PDFs, and videos. QR codes is a really great way to extend the experience of your physical exhibit at your gallery, library, archive, or museum. After my QR code is created, I test it out on a mobile device. That can be a tablet or a smartphone. So to test it, I just use it and engage with it as I would want my customers to. And I look and make sure that it looks and I get the experience that I want. In this case, it's working. Once someone scans their QR code, all they have to do is press play, and now they can interact with the virtual exhibit to extend the physical exhibit. When it comes to creating a virtual reality exhibit or event, you always want to test out your user's experience. And you want to make sure that you test it out on different devices, because depending on the device, the experience is going to be different and it's going to look different. You get the same content, but a different experience. So what things look like here on my tablet don't line up and look the exact same and get the same experience as I would on my mobile device or on my VR headset. And it is for that reason that I want to test out the experience on each type of device that my users may possibly be using. Now, in addition to the really fun virtual reality stuff that I do at Sojourner Truth African Heritage Museum, I still do the traditional archival stuff, which is still a lot of fun. So today I'm bringing my camera in with me because I'm going to be digitizing some of the current exhibits that are up for archival purposes. All right, let's go. Let's head to the museum. So one of the things that I really enjoy about the work that I do is the flexibility of it. So I do work part-time as an archivist with the Sojourner Truth African Heritage Museum, which allows me to travel to places like Ghana and Sierra Leone to do a lot of the research and learn a lot about the African side of the history that we bring to in the museum. So it gives me time to really learn and not just spend my time inside at the museum within the four walls, but to travel and to learn about our heritage. So after I spent my time doing the research, taking photos, editing everything, which I'll show you later, the whole entire process, then I create the QR codes, bring them into the museum, and make sure that they're actually working properly. So some of these link to PDFs, some of them link to videos, and some of them link into the virtual worlds that I created. But the intention is to extend the experience that the users have when they visit the museum. So once I have gone over to the museum and I have digitized, basically created digital surrogates of the exhibits or the artifacts that are going into our cataloging system, I come home and I accession them, which basically means to log them into the cataloging system. So I customize a database that we use to track all of the metadata for the items. So that's what I'm going to do next is I'm going to catalog them, put in all of the detailed information about the items, do a little bit of research on the items, their significance, their history, where they came from. I'm going to also edit the images in Photoshop and prepare them to be exported into our online exhibition platform that we use, which is called Omeka. So that's what I'm headed to do next. This takes up probably the majority of the work that I do. It can take from several hours to several days or several weeks, depending on the item. Sometimes I come across artifacts that I can't really find information on or about. This is the more time-intensive work that I do as an archivist. Okay, so we're gonna add, so this is a pedestal that I grabbed, and this is basically how you manipulate the objects that you bring in. It's pretty simple. I'm gonna add in, let's see, I can bring in this basket. It looks very similar to the one that we just edited. So say for example, I could put this basket in the physical space, and then if someone wanted to learn more about it or to see it actually being used, I could allow them to click into the virtual world to access this basket. So, and then you can turn on the information so that there's an information tab where people can click here to view, like if they want to go to a website, I can send them to like the Omeka platform. So this would be good if someone's going from the virtual world into the database system, into Omeka, or if they're going from the virtual world into SOJO. But for most cases right now, it's people going physically into SOJO and extending that experience from the physical world into a virtual world. So they're scanning with their phones, they're scanning the QR codes, which then brings them either here or to the digital database, into the virtual database. So because there's so many unlimited spaces that you can create a whole entire exhibit, or you can just create several objects in one exhibit and have multiple spaces. So I could like put a mask in here and add that link to come here. So when someone clicks on this, I could send them directly to Sojourner Truth, or I could send them to the Sojourner Truth museum website itself. So I can say, I want this person to go to the museum. And I can also hide it, so it doesn't have to stay open. This information here can also be changed. All of this can be changed. So now if someone clicks on this, it will ask them, do they want to go to the external link? This is actually a demo space. There's nothing in here. I just used this one specifically for showing people. So this is an example of one of those spaces that's partially complete. It's complete to me in terms of my objective of what I was creating it for. So there is a exhibit that includes Beckworth. So it's not a Beckworth exhibit specifically, but it's a wall within Sojourner Truth, and there's a QR code that people scan. When they scan that QR code, it brings them here into the Jim Beckworth trading post. So this is an actual PDF ebook that people can read, and you can also teleport to other rooms. And then this is just another space that I have that you can teleport to. So you can teleport from space to space. So this is just kind of an example or an overview of what it is like for myself being an archivist at the Sojourner Truth African Heritage Museum. So I kind of call this like my CV room. Here's a virtual representation of myself and some of the other VR projects that I've worked on. So yeah, this space is basically kind of like, I use it as my virtual CV. And you can sit and interact with things within this space. So this is my YouTube channel, and this is my podcast over here, a link to my podcast. But yeah, I wanted to just take some time to kind of show what is it like being an archivist for the Sojourner Truth African Heritage Museum, and how I'm able to incorporate VR. So VR is actually one of the last things that I do as an archivist at the Sojourner Truth. So I do all of the traditional stuff, digitizing, creating digital surrogates, doing the cataloging, doing all of that work before I finally do bring something into a virtual space. So pretty much, that's pretty much what, in an essence, what I do. I take the digitals, create digital surrogates of the physical objects, do the traditional cataloging, do the research on those, bring them into the Omeka platform so that people can then do deeper dives of their research, and then they go into VR. Everything does not go into VR. I don't believe that VR is necessarily the best space for every exhibit or every project. And I feel like VR is a way to extend, not necessarily replace, the experience that a user is going to have at a gallery, library, archive, or museum. There are some projects that I've worked on. So like my nonprofit Legacy Design Studio, it's all VR. So my office is in VR, my gallery is in VR, the library I'm working on is in VR. It's all completely VR. So it's not an extension of something in the real world, and there will be links to information in the virtual world that will bring people out into the real world. So that's another way of going about it. All right, so I will take any questions that you guys have. This is the actual Beckworth exhibit. So what I did is I brought in some free 3D objects through Sketchfab. So Sketchfab is a platform or a program that works. So you can bring in free 3D objects that can then be interact with, and people can click on them to learn more. Same with this horse. As you can see, some are animated, some are static objects. So I brought this in kind of as a representation of what this 3D world can do. So this is hosted by spatial.io. It is traditionally created for gamers, for people to create gaming, but I decided to use it for educational spaces. And there's other libraries and there's other people that are in spatial that are using it for the same thing. And then this is another example of a kind of like a link. So it's like a virtual link. Excuse me. So this would link to an article or a magazine about Beckworth. So essentially, some people can use their VR space almost like a virtual web page. And before I got into library and archive, that is what I did. I did web design for about 20 years. So it's almost as if your VR space can be used as a game to interact with, or it can be used as almost like a 3D website. So again, here's some animated things. And so specifically with spatial and some of the other 3D platforms that I've been using, what I really like about spatial is you can access it on your cell phone, you can access it on your tablet, and it's also in the Oculus VR headset. So that is what I really like is I've created the space, but then I go and test it in those different platforms, whereas there's been other platforms that I've worked with, such as Mozilla Hubs or Second Life, that cannot necessarily be accessed on a tablet or a cell phone, but they're only for your internet browser. So this is the James Beckworth. So here is also a link. One thing I do want to mention is depending on the type of resources you use. So for this example, I don't have the podcast play live within the space because it's very taxing in terms of the memory and the amount of data usage. And so therefore it's not mobile friendly. So what I have it here is just a link, an external link, and then someone can go listen to the podcast that way. So that was one of the things that I mentioned, is that the experience will not always be the same. Here on my computer, yes, it will work, it will be great, but on a cell phone or maybe even a tablet on another mobile device, it will slow it down and the experience will not be as good. And so I try to make sure that whatever space I do develop, that it's gonna work across all platforms and that it's gonna have a quality experience, regardless of the device that the person is on. So the same thing with video. If your purpose is to increase accessibility and engagement, that's something that you want to be mindful of, is the experience that the user is going to have, knowing how are they going to access it. Are they going to access it from a tablet or a cell phone versus are they going to access it from a computer? Or it would be fine if the videos and the audio plays live within the space that you are working in.
I have a question, because before we started the presentation, I was talking to you about a summer STEAM program. So if we were to use this in terms of presentation, would you want each student to be on their own, like a device, or would you have them in a room and then this is projected, attached to the laptop so they can view it on a bigger screen as an introduction?
I think it depends on the objective. So to me, in terms of STEAM, if I'm just introducing the students to it, presenting it would be great. But for me, I'm a hands-on learner and I'm a visual learner. And when I was growing up, I really wanted to do things, even through my degree with library science. I want to get my hands dirty. I want to touch things and click them and see what they do. So I feel it would be better for students to actually have an account on Spatial and to be able to test out creating their own space. There are some templates that make it very simple for them to just go into a space without any 3D modeling experience like myself. I don't have any 3D modeling experience. So I would prefer the students to have their actual own Spatial accounts. They're free, they can log in. Or even if the instructor has a space that they're hosting, and allow the students to then collaborate with each other in that one room where they can then start adding things into that space. But I think something like this should be very hands-on. And that's actually one of the projects that I did when I was doing my graduate work is I was sharing how to make M.L.I.S more hands-on, how to change the experience of it being of more theoretical curriculum. We do a lot of reading, but actually give students hands-on opportunities to do some of the things we're learning. And I presented that by showing how VR could be incorporated into an M.L.I.S degree.
And I so agree with that. I think because, it's better just for them to do hands-on. Are they going to need to have the viewer, that VR viewer, or you were just using that as an example, sitting in
Yeah,
front
so
of your computer?
example, yeah, you definitely don't need it, and that's one of the reasons that I love browser-based VR. Is it's just a way to increase access, because VR, as technology moves forward, we're leaving more and more people behind. The current VR headset, so my VR headset's old. It was maybe about $200 or $300 at the time. The newer VR headsets are $500. The Apple headset is $5,000. That's not something that I'm going to invest in. So I want to make sure that anything that I am sharing with archives and museums is that it's affordable. And browser-based VR, excuse me, does not require a VR headset. So this space that I created it on my computer. I can use it on my computer or my cell phone or my tablet, and I can also use it in a VR headset.
So,
but it's definitely not required.
Yeah, I'm just really trying to think it through with you doing, presentations like these workshops that need to be done. So what's that called? Because I know at the museum, the building, the internet is shady, you know, and Liza's distracted me because she's clapping her hands up. But it is shady. And if multiple users are trying to use it at the same time, it slows down. So what do you say that, what would we need to help with that? Each individual person have a hotspot, or that's still not something that would be useful?
I'm not sure. We can discuss about an individual hotspot or just adding a hotspot in SOJO, since we're adding
Either,
to
I don't know, I'm just kind of getting some advice, because I
Yes.
would like for this presentation to go really well, you know what I mean? And not have that whole, I just think all of these programs are really great, but it's all contingent upon the Wi-Fi connection for them to be
Yes.
really great. And
Right.
and then, so no matter how we prepare for these, it falls apart when technology is false.
Yeah. So I think we could test it out. So when I was there, I'm just one person testing it out. So we could test it out and have different people access it and see how does it work. We could add, to me, I think the best route would be to add a hotspot at SOJO. That way it's always there, no matter who's there, whether it's for the student project or visitors or people who come in, because I know we do tours. That hotspot is always there, and it could be something that's connected that people can automatically turn on or have an option to turn on to increase their the bandwidth, I guess you could say.
Right.
My husband does network security for the California state, so that is actually what he does. So I could have him come in and give us suggestions on what the best thing would be. So we actually have those here in my house to extend our reach, because if I'm working in the backyard by the pool, the internet is slower. So he has, I don't know the tech about, that's a different area of tech than I do. So he has something so that when we're in the backyard, our internet isn't slow anymore. So we can still have the same quality of access that we do inside.
Okay, so are those routers, or what are you talking about? Like I said, Eliza, your tech support, what are you?
Oh, tech support, I would take that. We're gonna have to cut this part out. I would take that lightly. I think the hotspot is 100% necessary. I think it makes so much more accessible. I mean, a lot of people like myself have hotspot. I have satellite. It's very easy for me. But if you have a hotspot on the spot, it just opens up to how many people. But other than that, I don't know how helpful I can be in making decisions.
I mean, it's a good
I almost
discussion.
clapped again when she said hotspot, but I refrained.
Oh, I was
Or-
trying to frame a question.
We have Orbi, so we have Orbi Netgear, and we also have the Google routers. And he has like routers placed throughout our house. So there's one upstairs, there's one downstairs, one near the backyard. And then we have these things called Orbis that extend the network, I guess. I don't know because I'm like, yeah, it's not my area in terms of, and he's always like all about security because that's what he does, is making sure that not only can people access the information that they need to, but that people can't get into it that aren't supposed to be into it. So making sure that that network is still secure, but giving people access to what they need to get access to, but not allowing outsiders into that system. So
So those, so that's why, like, at the base of any question, you know, or like you said, you guys have questions or setting up this program there at the museum. I think this is just like a baseline question, because I've again been there. There's so many businesses in the Foreign Square that use the main internet system that it does slow a lot of you know, connection down. There's connectivity is hard in certain areas of the museum because of the way that it's laid out in there. So that's something that I again wanted to start the conversation with. So another question you asked us if we had any questions about your work as an archivist at the Sojourner African Heritage Museum. What is the approval process for collection related policies? And you were the first fellow that came on board and put policy in place. So that is one of the questions I wanted to ask you today.
So when I got to SOJO, there were already artifacts there. So I've noticed there's some things to me that were donated that aren't necessarily relevant to the objectives of SOJO, but I think because they are connected to our history, they can become relevant. But what I put in the documentation in terms of the approval process is that when something is donated or something is purchased for SOJO, it kind of needs to make sure that it aligns with the SOJO's mission and objectives. And that we have the proper environment to make sure that we can preserve the object that's being donated. So there's a number of things. I don't have them memorized off the top of my head, but one, that it's relevant, that we have the environment to preserve it, because not only is a museum supposed to share things, but our job is also to be able to preserve what we have. So making sure that it's relevant, that we can preserve it, and also making sure that we make a note of where it's coming from. So that's one of the things that I'm working on now is the provenance of an object. Where did it come from? Who donated it? When, who had it before us? When was it brought in? Who was it brought in? Or was it something created by an artist? But the process basically is just a number of items, making sure that SOJO not only is the best place for that object, but that we are also the best place in terms of preserving that object. Because there are oftentimes, like I have photos and maps here at home that have begun to stick together, or they've begun to bleed because they were given to my husband by my mother-in-law, and he put them in a plastic container and put them in the garage. So now I'm having to restore them because they were not in the best environment for them. So I know SOJO has storage facilities. It might be that that storage facility has to be kept at a certain temperature or has certain types of light. So we need to make sure that anything that we bring in, we are able to preserve it because we don't want it to, be ruined by our lack of being able to have it. So maybe partnering with a space that we can, you know, keep certain items in where they're still in SOJO's care.
All right. So I again, all of these donations and because Sojo is a grassroots um museum, and you've been there, and when you first began, I told you this is your it's you're you're the first. We've had a couple others, and they were kind of like, oh, this is just, it was a lot, to, organize, think about, and then have their class schedules and stuff like that. And, you took ownership of the position, to
Mhm.
see it more than just a fellowship, to shape it into your position, you know what I mean? They're at the museum. And I told you, you were the first of anything. And again, the museum just opened its doors as a full museum. Before, it was maybe not even 800 square feet between the gift shop and where Shona was operating as a studio slash, and then collecting and transitioning into a museum. And then, just 3 years ago, she opened the doors when she gained that space after the pandemic. So we're talking about an infancy, a museum that's in its infancy stages, even though it's been programming there for almost 30 years, in that space, right?
Right.
So I'm saying that to address the way things are acquired, in
Yeah.
the acquisition. There was none. People call her up and say, hey, I have this stuff. And then she'll say, bring it by. And then she'll get really excited about it. You know what I mean? And it's in our collection. And then it's like, Shona, did you get an inventory list from these people? How much does it cost? And da, da, da. And then it's like, okay, no, well, so you got to do better, right? And
Right.
so we started doing better and started making people kind of do that. And that way we can assess the value of things and of what that collector says the value of it is, right? And to maintain records. Storage is another issue. So, it was, again, everything was just stored,
Yeah.
in a offsite office space, and then an offsite actual storage unit. It was nothing in controlled temperature. We're not talking as if we're talking about the museums that have been established over 30, 40, 50 years. We're talking again about a museum in its infancy, and also in a um, like a business incubator, or incubator, for other, it's not where the museum is in its own location and
Yeah.
can set aside a floor in controlled temperatures, for its collection base, right? So
Yeah.
you're making those recommendations.
Hmm. So I found the document. Actually, can share my screen and share it with you. But before I do that, I want to say that I believe that is one of the reasons why I love being at Sojo, is because it's grassroots, it's new. Um, so I think it's different going into a space where a lot of these things are already done for you, or they're already done, and you're coming in, and so you're almost kind of, because I've worked at other libraries and archives, and they kind of have a set way of doing things, and they're not open to suggestions. They're like, this is what's been working with us for this long, um, and they don't want to change that. And there's been some places that I've found, so a library that I worked at in Los Angeles, where even though they did have a set environment, and they've been around for a while, it still was not conducive to the type of items that they did have. Um, so even some older places, they still don't have the proper environment based on what I was taught in school. And a lot of that just comes from a lack of funding or having staff that are conservators. So an archivist, a preservationist, and a conservator are totally different positions. So that's one of the trainings that I'm looking forward to doing, is learning how um, to do some conservation, how to repair books, how to repair spines of books. I only know how to repair digital photos because of my background in graphic design and knowing how to use Photoshop, but how to repair and how to take care of photos was something that was not taught as a part of our M.L.I.S. It was something that I had to learn on my own. So I think having people with those specialties or those areas is also a difficulty that libraries and archives have. So this is the collection policy that I put together. And this is the collection criteria. So that it's in the scope, which I mentioned. The format. So another thing that's important is the format that it's in. So say, for example, if SOJO is donated cassette tapes or VCR tapes, do we have a player to play those? Do we have a way to preserve those even though we're receiving them? Do we have a way to give people access to the data that's on them? Do we have a way to make sure that they're taken care of? And do we have a way to archive them? We don't want to, a lot of people think digitizing is preservation. It's only the first step to preserving. So knowing that the format of what we're receiving, whether it's audio or video, is it something that we have the capacity to take care of and to preserve? Also looking at the condition that we receive things in. Will they be hazardous? Do we have the space? So that goes into the storage. Are they duplicates of something that we already have? And then the legal and ethical considerations. We've run into a lot of museums now returning objects to Benin or to Senegal, where these objects illegally taken. So we went into those, as well as oftentimes people will donate things not knowing their history. Were they used for ceremonial purposes? Do they have a certain way that they're supposed to be stored? Are they supposed to be stored up high? So for example, the Quran is not supposed to have anything on top of it. It's a spiritual text. Is it stored in a way that's proper? So in SOJO, we have in the glass case a wooden tablet of verses of the Quran that's written. Now, someone who doesn't know that that's Quran might be like, oh, that's Arabic, that's pretty cool, and not maybe store it in a way that is respectful of the culture and the history of the object. So we want to make sure that people know what they're collecting and that they have knowledge of what they're collecting so that they're also storing it properly. And then I have acquisition terms and restrictions, which basically goes into recording who, where we received it, who we received it from, that we have a label and that we have a gift of deed on hand. And that basically makes sure that the person is acknowledging that they have gifted this object, that now they are giving us the rights to steward it, to take care of it. So oftentimes people are given the responsibility of the object, but they are not the actual owner of the object. So your gift of deed or label of acknowledgement is almost like a contract that says, this is what you're responsible for in terms of us gifting you this object. Sometimes there's also privacy and confidentiality. Someone may say, here's a document of a business owner in Sacramento, but I don't want this to be made public for 10 years. We want to make sure that this person maybe has passed away first or something like that. So there's a lot of things that go into acquisitions. And SOJO will then be able to say, well, based on these things, this item does or does not fit with our mission as the museum. So there's that I've worked on. I also have the emergency preparedness. So that's the other thing is, due to any type of flooding or emergency disasters that may happen, we want to make sure that we have plan and documentation prepared for any of the things that we have in the collection. That was another part of my job, is not only have I been archiving specific objects in SOJO, but I've also been archiving SOJO's history and the exhibits that are there. So not each individual objects, but even just for emergency preparedness and disaster preparedness, or even for insurance and security purposes, so that we have a record of what is housed in SOJO and where it is. That way, if there is an emergency, we know how to be better prepared, and we have a record of what was there as well. So I also have the emergency preparedness records that I've also created.
That's interesting, and I'm gonna go another direction with that that comment or, response, because I know that instead of waiting, we're getting ready to start a capital campaign. We're right now doing a feasibility study for the museum to find its own location, its own building. And so that would be like a good, conversation to have in terms of um, accreditation and having someone come out now that you've set these systems up, and you have the guide, and we're here, we're at this point. And I know that I was listening to some of the seminars or webinars that AAAM, Association for African American Museums, were hosting on how so few African American museums are accredited, are seeking accreditation, right? And I know SOJO is at all three of the stages, but now needing someone to come out and do the accreditation for the collection and for the museum instead of waiting for a new location, blah blah. So again, thank you, because you're steering us to that path of making sure it's accredited. Even though we're at that 3-year, going into our 4th year, it's still, you shaped it so that we can have someone come out, because there's services that we can get as members of the association to come and, do one of those. I think we'll do it next year after we hear back from the Institute for Museum and Library Research. It's our next phase, of programming, then to get that accreditation started. Here's another question I wanted to talk about. What are the abandoned property laws of the state in which the institution is located? I think this is a question you shot at me, because you sent 100 questions. I'm actually, I have your document pulled up where you actually said 97 questions to me. And I'm like, I know she's not serious asking me all this.
Yeah, they were in to help and to prepare for.
I know.
For
97
and I
questions.
was like,
I'm
I
giving
didn't know what existed already and what I didn't want to duplicate things. And like I said before, sometimes you go in and there's policies in place, and me coming in as a new person, they're like, oh, well, this is how we've been doing it. And then I come in, well, this is best practices. So I don't want to bump heads. And I feel like being at Sojo, I haven't had that problem because it's brand new. Everything's grassroots. And so I like that, because I can then bring in everything that I've learned and put it into action. And I don't have to bump heads with, well, this is what we've been doing. So
literally, these are the questions.
yeah.
And then these are the ones in red that I respond to. Like, yeah, okay. And so, so I just kind of shot you this one here on, in the chat on deassessing, because when the director was called up after the pandemic, and during actually right after the pandemic, and at its peak in California, there was a lot of collectors were trying to do, okay, a succession plan. What do I do with my collection? They heard the museum had opened, African Heritage Museum is opened in Sacramento County. People from the Bay Area even looked into the museum and called Shona up to come pick up, their collection that they were donating. And some were saying that she couldn't ever, sell or assess the collection that they're giving them, and it must be kept in, there at the museum in its collection, and not, be disposed or sold or broken up or whatever. Could you talk a little bit about the assessment?
So the deaccessioning, it comes back to that that document, the gift of deed. Is it depends on who donated the object, and you have that contract of whatever the terms that they've agreed. They may say this item, if you get rid of it, it has to be donated to some other institution. So I know that as a California nonprofit, if the business were to close, you can't just sell things. You have to give them to a similar type of nonprofit. So the museum is a nonprofit, it's in the arts. So it would have to then donate or give its items to a similar nonprofit, a museum or an art gallery or something like that. Now, in terms of deaccessioning, however, it comes down to an item by item basis. It also looks at the gift of deed. But I've not learned anything that says you cannot deaccession an item. So in fact, when I worked in Los Angeles at the Grant Library for USC, that is what I was doing. Is I was weeding hundreds and hundreds. It made me cry at one point, of books from the 1700s that they were deaccessioning. So we were going in and discarding them, and then they were recycling them. And I asked, what are we doing with these items? You know, we're discarding them. They're being removed from the shelves. What happens to them next? A lot of those items were recycled, which means burning. They were burning them because they didn't have the storage to have them. And because there was no contract or otherwise that said they couldn't, they were able to. So they were able to recycle those things. So I know sometimes libraries will do sales, which will help with fundraising, is they'll have older books and they will sell them to the public, or they will donate them and gift them to the public. So it really just depends on the contract, that gift of deed, who donated the item, and what they said in terms of what happens next. So in terms of not having those types of records on file, I would have to look into what those California laws state. And my guess is it would be SOJO would have to gift those things to another institution, to be on the safe side, I would say. But
I think the museum is a charity, and it's set up as a charity in most states. I know here in Illinois, you know, with the Phantom Gallery Chicago network project I have, anything that's collected through the gallery, actually not through the gallery, but through the network, is as a charity, I have to gift it to another you know, organization. I can't keep it in my collection. So I'm very careful about when I'm collecting, and it's for the gallery, which is my profit and it's my collection, versus something that's been donated and I have a donation slip that states that it is Phantom Gallery Chicago Network, where they're getting the tax write-off on those things. So yeah, they would be, the museum would have to, but I saw somewhere in your presentation, and I know we're not jumping off of the VR, but because you're an archivist and it's part of the conversation, because I was looking at one of your proposals that's in front of me, and it's two-part here, and then, you know, this is what you would teach, you know, your audience, or in your training, a younger citizen archivist you would be teaching and working with, they would have to know these things that we're talking about, beyond just sitting at the computer dealing with a VR and creating an online museum, but they need to know the other parts that are very vital as archivists in the field. So that's why I kind of am jumping over here asking these other kinds of questions and discussion. So I saw you said something about trying to make sure that in perpetuity that we don't have something that, what did you say? I skipped away from the questions list that you gave me. I think this is something on your side that's in the manual that you were talking about in terms of, you know, when you're acquiring something for the collection, that you're making sure that you sign off. It's not something that you're stating in perpetuity that you would always have this in the collection. Didn't you talk about that right now?
Yeah, so I don't remember exactly what page that's on in our collection policy. But yes, there is I think in the deaccession, excuse me, and disposal section, I think it's section 4, the criteria for deaccessioning. And then there's also the outgoing loans or long-term loans. And then there's the access and use. So I'm not sure what section it's in. But oftentimes you will have archival records that will say, oh, SOJO is in partnership with another institution where they are the caretakers of those objects or records, but they are not the owners of it. So there will be limits onto what you can do. And usually a partnership like that is created so that you can increase access. So you're helping the organization to increase access, maybe sharing it with your patrons, but you don't have necessarily ownership to do whatever you want with it. So there's a limit to access management, how it can be accessed or who can have access to it. And there's no, you don't have the right to dispose of it or share it or give it away or anything like that. So it's almost like, you know, people who may be aware of content creators. So content creators and influencers today, you're creating digital content. And when you sign your contract, when you're pitching to these brands is, oh, I created this TikTok or this Instagram reel for them to use it as an ad for 3 months or forever. So that's kind of very similar to archives is we are being allowed access to share these artifacts or objects or records for a certain amount of time, or is it for forever? And it really is on a contract by contract basis. And that's also something to consider is, does that benefit SOJO? Does that help us with our mission to increase access and engagement of what we have? Do we want to enter into partnerships with other organizations to do so? So for example, one idea that I've had that I wanted to kind of pitch to Shona is having some type of genealogy exhibit. I had an idea, kind of like a brainstorm. Okay, we come here, or people come into SOJO and they learn about our history, but what about if we have some type of exhibit that's helping them to research their roots themselves and maybe partnering with National Archives to share archival records, census records and things like that in SOJO to help people to create their family tree or look into their family history. We would have partnership with them and be able to share those records, but we would be more like stewards or caretakers. We wouldn't be owners of those records. So those would be similar situations or contracts where things like that would come into place.
Well, you know, that is, I think that's a good example that you're using, but in terms of like just right there in Sacramento, you know how the museum has the partnership with the city of Office of Preservation.
Okay.
And within that initiative, I'm looking for the initiative, something, the African American Experience Local History Exhibition, which is where the museum and the City of Sacramento Historic Preservation Office and the Office of Community Engagement has a project that they're bringing to SOJO, so that they're creating an 800 square foot exhibition hall and within the existing museum space, you know, and that again is showing what you're saying, developing a collaboration with the city and its resources to create this and share within this space as they're collecting stories. The exhibit goal is to offer the community an opportunity to explore and celebrate the stories, struggles, and triumphs of African American experience within our city of Sacramento. It implies its inclusivity, access, and community involvement, open minds, and changing lives through the exploration and celebration of African American history. So in terms of like, I know we're headed for the National Archive share, yes, but locally, you know, this partnership is being shaped from October, and again, we applied to M.L.I.S, you know, for you know, I'm just looking at the abstract here, but for another 2 years in order for the city to come in and partner with SOJO to build this space, to connect. So one way or the other, it's already, the city's already doing this preservation, but they felt that they can do it better by partnering within a Black community and with the museum, because it was moving so slow with the outreach that the city was doing, and trying to build their archive. So
Right.
I guess that's a real working model. Like you gave a hypothetical of us partnering with the National Archives, but this is something that's, in our reality that we're shaping with the city
Right.
to do. I just thought I would bring that up. And then
That
I'm
is
also,
a that is a really great example. Also, like the heritage exhibit that we recently had. My understanding is it's not a permanent exhibit. So something like that, I don't know what the details of that contract are, but it could be something like, oh, we are exhibiting this here in SOJO for the 2 month or 3 month period. And so during this time, this is what SOJO is allowed. They are caretakers and stewards of the things that are within that exhibit. Similar, I think the Crocker Art Museum recently did some exhibits of African American artwork, and I'm sure that was a temporary project. It's not a permanent installation. So there have to be things like that in place in terms of contracts and partnerships.
So right now with the museums, Somalia Lewis Gallery, Gallery 157, they're the curators for that space, and they have, for the last year, they've had 2 years, they've had traveling exhibitions where they've featured artists from Moulton, Alabama, and that region, and sending them as cross exchanges with Sacramento. So they have the loan agreements and all that set up for that. But that we're not talking about, we're talking about exhibitions that are temporary in the gallery space there, not permanent exhibitions, because those other exhibitions there at the museum are the permanent
Okay.
exhibit. They're not rotating. And I think one of the problems also with loan, we had an artist that got, I don't know, temperamental or whatever. And he wanted a painting back, and he said he put it on loan. Well, that was part of the installation. So they just took it off the wall. Okay, whatever. We'll just give you your work back and put something else in its place, right? Because you have that going on with people that decide they don't no longer want to have their work on loan, and it's and they actually have a mural that's, when you come in the door and it shows the passage with that mural. That was part of what they worked on. But I think they probably would have snatched it up if it hadn't been where that was the vision of the director. It wasn't, even though they painted it, it wasn't their concept. It was something done for the museum. You know what I mean? And they brought in some paintings for another installation within that room. So when they started saying, well, I want to put myself in another show, it's like, okay, here, come get your work, and so that's where we are, and with, the director being the curator and able to take work, but things that are in the collection are not readily, that has been signed over to the museum. People can't come in and ask for it. They don't own out.
Right. Yeah.
I know we're coming to an end of your presentation, and again, thank you for bearing with me. I was looking at this proposal that you've written for the Association for African American Museums, was to illuminate the fusion of technology and cultural preservation. And you're talked about presenting the for the 46th annual AAAM conference commemorating the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, and you would like to delve into the significance of preserving African American cultural history through VR. It's bridging, safeguarding the past and building a bridge to the future. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for that upcoming conference, I was looking at a lot of the exhibitions that SOJO has, and kind of brainstorming ideas of how to tie in the civil rights theme with some of the exhibits that we have existing, or versus creating something brand new. And I feel like it would be a good demonstration or example to other galleries and museums of how they can take their current um, exhibits and extend them into VR, where they may in the future look at, when exhibits are being created, how to keep VR or even augmented reality in mind. So I was looking at, in SOJO, we have that Can't Breathe mural that's there. And I don't know if it was created by Shona or who it was created by. So we'd have to get the approval and things like that before I could use it. But basically, to take a civil rights project, and something that's relevant that we could then present um, to the panel when we were discussing how to bridge the gap between the digital divide. Like I was saying before, is a lot of people feel like as technology moves forward, we have AI now, things are becoming expensive, we got VR, but how to make sure that as a community, our people are not being left behind, and how we can actually use technology to increase our access, versus there's this digital divide of where we don't have access. So one of the big arguments that I find people have is, why are we paying for access to archival records? Why do we have to pay to find out where our people are from? Why are we paying for these types of services when they should be free to us? Why is there this paywall behind certain educational institutions and the information that they're providing? So my proposal is that technology or the use of VR can be used to increase access to our history as a civil right, and access to our heritage as a civil right, and then also using our history and issues of civil rights as an example to kind of present that information.
Yeah, I think that's again so needed, and it's probably really needed now. I was looking up that artist Izzy Lowe, and he's been working with the museum since his mother has worked with the museum, so he donated that as part of the, not a loan, but part of the museum. It's part of the permanent collection.
Okay.
So I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to use it,
Okay.
like this. But yeah, Izzy Lowe. He's also contributed to some of the murals that they're working on now, and contributed to the Harlem Renaissance project that was done up on Mac Road. He did some painting there, and some of the other murals. And he was a artist in training, a young artist in training that was always up there working with Shona on projects. Okay. Yeah. So, well, again, thank you so much. I don't know if you want to, any comments you want to do as you were finishing your presentation?
No, that's pretty much it. I'm just excited to be presenting. I've been trying to spread the word about VR. It seems like it's getting around. I'm excited to be sharing all the things that I'm learning. I'm gonna start doing research probably in the fall on, well, I won't say starting, I've already started, but presenting more on, okay, now that we have these digital spaces and these VR spaces, how do we preserve those? So we have best practices on preserving physical objects, digitizing them being one initial step. But then we have virtual worlds and we have virtual formats. How do we preserve those spaces? So that's one of the big questions that people are asking me is, you put all this time and effort into these virtual worlds and virtual spaces. How do we preserve those? So that's the next thing that I'm going to be kind of diving into coming up in the fall is sharing, you know, that part of VR and just diving a little bit deeper into virtual world. So if people have questions, they can head over to my website, aishaladon.com, where I'm going to be kind of sharing case studies of what I'm working on and what I'm researching as I move forward in the space, because there's not a lot of archivists or librarians in VR. So there's a couple of different communities and discussions that are taking place. So I'm excited to kind of be one of the people that are diving into that research.
Well, thank you so much, you know, for today's discussion on archives in VR with Aisha Abdul, well, Dr. Aisha Abdul Rahman. How am I saying that? I say M.L.I.S. How I use VR as an archivist preserving Black history at the Sojourner African Heritage Museum.